This video will cover important aspects of Lesson 1 in the Computing Skills textbook. We're going to be discussing two basic categories of computers components, those that are hardware and those that are software. Hardware are those components that you can physically touch. Software are those components that you cannot touch. Hardware is like a mouse, a monitor, a keyboard. Software is like your operating system or your text editor. There are 5 categories of systems. The first one is a laptop, the smallest of the full computer systems that you'll typically be using. The next category is a smartphone. A smartphone as a whole is a computer, but we don't consider it a full-fledged computer system as it only has limited capabilities. Next, we have the tablet. The tablet is in essence a step between a full computer and a smartphone. It has more capabilities and a larger area to work with, but still limited. Next, we have the all-in-one computer. An all-in-one is a full-fledged computer system where all the components that are necessary for the computer are merged into a single system. This system, in this case, has a monitor, a keyboard, a mouse, and the hard drive, disk drive, etc., all fused together into the same area. Lastly, we're going to talk about the desktop computer. A desktop computer is the components like an all-in-one, except the monitor and the computer casing itself, which has the hard drive, the processor, etc., is separated. Okay, one thing about computer systems is learning some of the terminology. One of those areas of terminology is the units of measurement that are applied in a computer system. In a computer system, the smallest unit of measure is known as a bit. A bit is a single item, such as a 1 or a 0. At the basic level of computing, all it understands are ones and zeros, or on and off states. Above that is a byte. A byte is 8 bits, and it's composed typically of one character of information. In this case, an A, a B, an @ symbol, etc. Now above that you just have higher levels of bytes. You have the kilobyte, megabyte, gigabyte, and terabyte. You're typically going to hear megabyte when referred to memory in a computer system, and you're going to hear gigabyte and or terabyte when you're hearing about a hard drive. Some more units of measurement that you're going to be hearing about one is called resolution. And the resolution for a monitor is in pixels. It's typically in how many pixels the screen is in width and in height as displaying. On a printer, on the other hand, they use the term resolution as well, but it's using a resolution that's known as dots per inch. This can be confusing, I understand, but I wanted to kind of show you an example here. On a monitor, the pixel is a small square area that can be changed a certain color. In this case, you have some light blues up to some darker blues to some lighter blues that contained all within that single pixel area. On a printer, on the other hand, it does it in dots per inch area. So in this case, you'll see a representation of the same monitor image being printed. In this case, you notice there's a lot of different colors being used, or excuse me, a lot of the same type of colors used, cyan, yellow, blue, black, because that's typically what printers are composed of. They use these many colors to get a close representation as they can. Continuing with our units of measure, a processor, which is the brains of the system, is identified in what's known as hertz. A hertz is a cycle per second of a waveform. In this case, we're operating in what's known as gigahertz, which is millions of hertz or millions of cycles per second. So what this is saying is that a processor can have millions of operations happening within 1 second of a time frame. The higher the gigahertz a processor typically indicates the better processor. Okay, a modem, such as that which you use to connect to the internet, comes in bits or megabits per second. This bit is that exact item I talked about earlier, a 1 or 0. Here are some computer hardware categories that you need to understand. There's a hardware of the processing. That's the hardware that actually does the computations within the system. There are storage hardware, output hardware, networking, and input hardware. I want to take a brief moment here to look inside of a computer and give you an idea of what some of the components are in the computer. This area is the processor. You can't actually see the processor because it's covered by both a fan and a heat sink, because the processor itself can get extremely hot. These both help to take the heat away from it. Next we have the RAM. This is known as the random access memory. This is what holds information that's being utilized by the processor temporarily. Next we have a hard drive. A hard drive is where you have permanent storage of information, unlike the memory. Your RAM only holds information when the computer's turned on. When the computer's turned off, it'll lose that data. Your hard drive, though, keeps it permanently. Another storage mechanism is known as a CD drive. Most computers have these, and it is typically slower storage, but it's removable. You can typically take these out and store them in another location. Okay, here's a better look at a processor. Two different looks. One, you can actually see the processor and look inside the processor. It's very small components that are connected to many tiny pins on the bottom of this wafer. The other screen is showing you the heat sink and the fan that sit on top of this processor. The component at the bottom that the processor is sitting into is known as the motherboard. It is the board that holds all the memory, the processors, all of the input-output ports. Basically, it is the land for your computer system. The processors themselves come in what are known as single core and multi-core. A single core just has one processor, multi-core has many. A multi-core is in many ways better than a single core processor. All right, when we look at processing hardware and how it works together, you have the processor, which asks for information from memory. Memory, if it doesn't have the information that the processor needs, goes to the hard drive and asks it for the information. And it cycles back and forth like this. Processor asks the memory, memory asks the hard drive sends to the memory sends to the processor, in a back and forth motion. Now, the faster of these items that you have a faster processor, faster memory, faster hard drive, the faster your system will work. Okay, when it comes to making your system work effectively, the more RAM or the more memory you have, the more programs you can run effectively. And that's up to a limit. Typically, in today's world, a maximum of 8 gigabytes of RAM is going to get you the best deal for dollar. Okay, storage hardware. We've already talked about the hard disk drive. The hard disk is just a mechanism that translates the ones and zeros into magnetic information, which it stores on little platters or similarly records inside of this device known as a hard drive. Another item is known as a solid state hard drive. instead of using platters, it actually uses memory chips that don't lose their information. There are some great pluses to having a solid state drive. It's much faster. Thus, your system can boot up literally within seconds, unlike possibly minutes with a regular hard drive. Some downsides to it is they don't last as long. A hard disk drive with platters can be written to many thousands of times. A solid state drive, though, is limited. Okay, USB flash drive. Most of you have probably used these before. They temporarily store your information for you. Optical drives, such as CD drives, Blu-rays, etc., are components of storage. You also have some options for additional storage outside of the computer. This is an external hard drive. It plugs in via USB port to your computer. I use these to make copies of my information and store them outside of my home in the event of a fire or theft. You also have card readers. Some of you have cameras that have cards in them that hold photos. This is a way to add that information into your computer system. And one of the more up-and-coming storage options is that cloud storage or cloud drives. There are several options out there. The ones that are shown here are only a few of them. I currently use Dropbox and Google Drive to save a lot of my off-site data. It's a lot easier than actually storing it on a physical hard drive, and I can access it anywhere. Okay, some other types of physical hardware devices are viewing and printing hardware. First, we have monitors. One of these is an LCD monitor, a liquid crystal display monitor. The other one's a cathode ray tube monitor. Older monitors versus newer monitors, they work similarly. They have what's known as a resolution, which means how large of an image you see on the screen. They have what's known as a native resolution, which means that at which their images look the best. Typically, when you buy a monitor, you're going to want to ensure that you've chosen one with the proper resolution beforehand, rather than changing it on the monitor after you get it, because it typically won't look as crisp. Okay, printers tend to be one of the bigger purchases that people make. There tends to be two kinds. One's listed here, it says is all-in-one. I don't consider that the main one. I would consider that an inkjet printer. All-in-ones can be both lasers and inkjets. So in this case, we have an inkjet printer, prints beautiful color. You can scan, you can copy. Sometimes you can even do faxing with an all-in-one or an inkjet if it has that capability. A laser printer, on the other hand, is a slightly different technology. It doesn't use ink, it uses toner like a copy machine. They tend to print much faster at a lower price than does an inkjet printer, although typically they are higher cost. Okay, let's talk about things that you send information into your computer, known as input hardware. The mouse, we're all familiar with this. It has two buttons, left and right. The one shown here actually has a track wheel in the center of it that allows you to scroll up and down pages. Touchpad, typically touchpads are only located on laptops. They're used in the absence of a mouse. Keyboard. Keyboard is probably the most efficient way to enter information into your system. There are many uses for a keyboard. There's many special keys on a keyboard, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about them. A touchscreen, it's a device where you actually push your finger on the screen, much like the new tablet computing. Okay, a pen tablet. This is an item typically used by graphic artists. You can draw on this and it will take your drawing and put a perfect representation of it on the screen. And a trackball. Very similar to a mouse, except your thumb is what moves the cursor rather than your whole hand. I had to change to one of these a few years back because I was starting to get carpal tunnel from my wrist moving so much. This helped my problem. Okay, input hardware, you also have what's called a USB port. This is the main port that we are going to put external information into our computer. You can connect all sorts of different devices, as it says here. Keyboards, printers, flash drives, etc. There used to be other types of ports, serial ports, parallel ports, etc., but the USB is starting to take over. Here's another type of input hardware, webcam. Webcams are becoming pretty popular, pretty common. These allow you to transmit your image and audio to other computers. Something you may not realize is they're often built directly into laptops and tablet computers. If you've bought a laptop, it probably has a webcam on it. Make sure that if you're using that computer, if you don't want the webcam on, make sure it's turned off. There are several types of operating systems available. Windows is the primary one in use today, but there are others out there. The Mac, Linux, are other computer system operating systems in use around the country and the world. The Android, iOS operating systems are typically used on tablets and smartphones. And there are a few other operating systems out there, but they're in very limited use. I want to talk quickly about anti-malware software, antivirus software, etc. This is one of the most important items that you can have loaded on your computer. Nearly every computer that is purchased comes with some antivirus software on it. You can get free antivirus software rather than paying for it. Microsoft offers its own antivirus software. It's called Microsoft Security Essentials. You can also get other free software that works as an antivirus, such as Avast antivirus.